Financial Stability Oversight Council. In that capacity as chair, what do you see as the biggest risks to the financial system right now?
Well, I think the good news is from a capital and a credit standpoint, that's not of a major concern. I would say the issue that I focus on at the moment of most significance is cybersecurity, and I'm not implying in any way that there is a cybersecurity risk, but this is the area that we need to continue to invest in. We need to continue to have public-private partnerships, and I'm very focused on the safety and security of the financial infrastructure.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Wagner, Chair of our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Thank you, Chairman Hensarling, and welcome, Secretary Mnuchin. Secretary Mnuchin, according to the most recent numbers provided by the United States Trade Association, Missouri exports support some 88,000 jobs in 2016, totaling $13.9 billion worth of goods. That's why earlier this year I joined many of my colleagues in urging the President to rethink his tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other goods. The retaliatory tariffs levied by Mexico will absolutely be felt in my home state of Missouri, which I noted earlier depends heavily on trade. My constituents are concerned that, as am I, that these tariffs will have a serious impact on our state and will create winners and losers in communities across Missouri. Mr. Secretary, as I mentioned before, some of these tariffs have targeted our allies. Can you describe in detail the expected end game for these trade actions, and what is the specific time frame you expect for these policies to achieve their desired effect?
Well, first of all, let me just comment. I share your view that exports create enormous job opportunities. So our overall view is we should be doing things to make sure that our companies can fairly compete and export fairly into these markets. We were in I put these in different buckets. There's obviously the NAFTA-related issues, there's the EU-related issues, and there's the China-related issues. As I mentioned, this is something we meet with the President on weekly. The economic team is very focused on all of this.
Time frame?
I can't commit to a specific time frame, although, as I previously mentioned, NAFTA is now a big priority since we have the Mexican election behind us.
Mr. Secretary, I wanted to take a second to focus on China. In 2017, growers in the United States sold nearly 1/3 of their soybean harvest to China. The recent Chinese tariffs on American soybeans will hit Missouri hard and already have. Reports of farmers are expected to sell their crops at a loss. What would you say to my constituents that will be directly impacted by the President's actions on trade, especially vis-a-vis my farming community?
I can assure you I never was an expert on soybeans, but I've now become an expert on soybeans. I follow this market daily. I can assure you that we're focused on this. We are in discussions with Secretary Perdue and others about this. As I said, this is an unfortunate impact of what we're trying to do is get free and fair trade with China, and they have unfairly targeted specific markets, and that's not coincidental.
No, it's not coincidental, and it's causing real harm in present day to the farming community and the soybean farmers in my home state of Missouri.
And I can assure you I and the President understand that, and we're focused on that.
If trade relations with China remain strained, commodity producers in Missouri will need to find new markets, Mr. Secretary, for their goods. ASEAN countries seem to be natural trade partners. Over half of U.S. congressional districts export more than $100 million in goods to ASEAN every year. ASEAN countries themselves wish to see stronger trade relations with the U.S. If U.S.-ASEAN trade relations become more formalized, whether that's multilateral, bilateral, whatever it is, Mr. Secretary, would China be, I think, pressured to institute fair trade practices? I'd like to make sure that I do put in a plug that we enter into some of these bilateral or a multilateral with ASEAN countries in order as an opportunity to have new markets for my farming and ag community and others in the district. China's ascension, Mr. Secretary, to the World Trade Organization has done little to change its predatory trade policies. Mr. Secretary, how can the World Trade Organization be restructured, in your thoughts, to better restrain China's behavior?
That's a complicated issue that I don't have time to go through now. I'd be happy to discuss that more with you, and Ambassador Lighthizer is really the expert on this. I would say, again, the rules-based system is okay if the rules are being followed. The problem is that, as you've outlined in the case of China, they are not following many of the things that they've.
Well, and they subsidize everything, Mr. Secretary. There are two kinds of companies in China, those that are owned by China and those that do everything China says. So we're going to have to look at some of, I think, those issues when it comes to interstate commerce and such in dealing with the WTO. So I look forward to continuing our conversation. I thank the chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again. Let me just start out with a basic question. Let me just see. If you were a business person and you started, you were on a business, you were buying a business, what would be the easiest way, best way for the business to move forward? If you bought a business that was deep in the hole, or you bought a business that was at level and moving in the right direction? What would you think would be the hardest task for one to accomplish?
I'm not trying to be coy, but that's a little bit of a hypothetical question that there are opportunities in both.
Well, the hypothetical question is, if there's something, if you got a company that is deep in the hole, going in the wrong direction, problems all over the place, as opposed to a company that you're buying that is, they've corrected some of the problems that was in there, they're moving forward in the right direction, things are starting to improve, they're starting to hire people, things are moving in the right direction, which, as a CEO, if you came in, I think you were a businessman, what would put you in the best situation?
Again, it's completely hypothetical, but sometimes it's easier to buy things that are broken, and sometimes it's easier to buy things that are fixed. I can't comment on hypotheticals.
Okay. Don't want to comment on hypotheticals. Well, let me not give you a hypothetical. Let me give you a fact. This country, when President Obama was the president, was in deep debt and was losing hundreds of thousands of jobs a month, and was in serious problem, in the worst financial crises since the Great Depression. That was the situation of this country when Barack Obama was the president, or became the president of the United States in 2008. Fact. Fact, not hypothetical. When the stable genius became the president, that's what he calls himself, self-proclaimed stable genius, this country, because over 100 months ago, we were gaining jobs. That's 8 years ago. Moving forward in the right direction, creating jobs. What situation do you think is better for a president of the United States? Not a hypothetical.
Sorry.
That's a fact. Unless you can deny that fact, which the stable genius denies all the time, different facts. Now, let's move forward. Because I'm concerned about what I saw today at NATO and at the G7. Because you would agree that we are more interconnected today as a world than ever before. Is that not correct? That's not hypothetical either, is it? Isn't it a fact that we're more interconnected as a world today, Mr. Secretary?
More relative to when?
To any other time in our history.
I don't know if we're more. We are interconnected.
Well, with technology, are you denying with technology today and the way that our trade system works and all of the things that are moving around the world and how fast things are, we are not more interconnected today than we were ever?
Again, we are interconnected, so I'm happy to answer other questions.
So when were we more interconnected?
More is a relative issue. I don't know if we're.
Are you a stable genius, Mr. Secretary?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Are you a stable genius?
Am I a stable genius?
Yes.
I'm stable, and I won't refer to myself as a genius one way or another.
I'm just trying to find out because I know sometimes working for a stable genius I'd like to know how that is. I mean, does the stable genius, and it's not words that I've used, it's the words that he said he is. He said he's a stable genius. Does he listen to you? Because I'm listening to some of my colleagues, and actually a lot of the things, especially around tariffs, we agree upon. We agree that we're losing jobs. We agree that there are, scenarios that's going on that's worrying all of us, Democrats and Republicans. And I'm hearing you saying some of the kinds of things, and some of the administration and some of the people around them might be saying the same thing. So I'm wondering whether or not the president, when you're in those rooms, is he listening to you? Or because he's a stable genius, he just does whatever the heck he wants to do without listening to your advice. Does he listen to your advice?
Yes, I can assure you that the president listens to my advice. He is the president. Sometimes he follows my advice and sometimes he doesn't, which I respect. But I wouldn't be in this job if I didn't think he listens to my advice, and I couldn't be happier with the economic plan we're on.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being with us. The president offered a laudable goal at the G7 meeting in Quebec when he challenged our leaders to get to no tariffs, no barriers. It's been reported that German automobile makers are open to the idea of zero tariffs. That would certainly be a win if we could de-escalate with Europe on that basis of zero tariffs between us and them. But we've seen little talk elsewhere of this as the end game, and instead what we see is a two-front trade war, one with China, which frankly is not playing by the rules, and another with our close economic allies in the EU, Canada, and such, and our domestic industries and agriculture are being threatened. On the list of targets are bourbon, bikes, blue jeans, and even Mr. Poliquin's beloved Maine lobsters. So could we do a reposition in a different direction here? Because zero tariffs, for example, if we looked at autos, would be a victory for free trade and fair trade and maybe get us in a position where our allies are on the same page. And when we talk to our allies in the EU and our largest export market, Canada, are we reiterating zero tariffs as the goal? I would think that that might be a first and second option in order to try to advance a way to get us together.
We are advocating no tariffs, no tariff barriers, no subsidies. It's a package altogether. We are advocating growing exports for U.S. companies so they can compete fairly. And if we have fair trade, we will increase exports significantly, and we won't have the outsized trade imbalance that we have.
And I think that outcome would also give us a position with our allies where if we can set high standards, we can then maybe do something collectively to discuss the problem with Beijing's lack of following the rules. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, and this is something that Blaine Luetkemeyer brought up, and he and Steve Pierce and I have talked about, it's this fact that criminal organizations are infamous for using anonymous shell companies